What has Trump said specifically? Because he said, in his, the White House said today, people are going to be shocked. That's a repeat of what you said. He said years ago. Bring us back to that. Specifically, what did Trump say to you?
He said, I said, well, why aren't you releasing this? And he said, well, Pompeo thinks it would expose our methods and sources. And I said, but Mr. President, you've seen it all. What it is? What is it? And he said, it's so horrible. He said, I can't tell you, but someday you'll know.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to these of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years.
I think what we're talking about here is the involvement of the Central Intelligence Agency, hard evidence that they were involved in the plot to Kennedy. Beyond that, I don't know. Like every other American, I'm very anxious to see because I want to finish this narrative.
But just recap the history of JFK. What really happened? The big revelations, that we broke, that secret tape a few months ago, and then yes. What you're hearing is in these files, because Trump has said, obviously saying that, I guess that means he's seen some of it, or he's been given a synopsis that we're going to be pretty blown away. Roger, what have you heard?
Well, as you know, Alex, in 1994, the Congress passed a law mandating that all of the classified documents regarding Kennedy's be released, subject to the approval of whoever was president at the time. The year set was 2017. When Trump became president, I began urging him to release it all. I could find no reasonable reason in the public interest why this information should continue to be classified. And he, I think, had every intention of doing so. Then at the last minute, he held back 20% of the material. That's the material that is scheduled now to be released today. When I asked him why he had made that decision, he said that Mike Pompeo, then the head of the CIA, had convinced him that full release would expose the methods and sources of that agency. Well, all of the sources are dead. And frankly, when it comes to methods, if the United States government was involved in the murder of a president, I think we ought to know that. So now the president, who has told Sean Hannity, told Judge Napolitano, told myself that the material is devastating, is shocking, I think we're going to find another significant piece of the puzzle. What really happened here, I think, is pretty clear. I hate the word conspiracy, but a plot with Lyndon Baines Johnson at the helm. The audio tape that you produced only weeks ago, in which Cliff Carter, chief political operative for LBJ, and Billy Saul Estes, a crony of Johnson's who went to prison for corruption, but was under intense investigation during the time of Kennedy's, talk openly in that audio tape about the fact that Lyndon Johnson hired a man, Malcolm Mac Wallace, who is the shooter from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Number one, his fingerprints are found on the window casing and on the cardboard boxes that form the so-called crow's nest. No less than 6 witnesses identify a man who meets the physical description of Wallace in the window of the 6th floor. Another man sees Wallace departing and running out of the Texas School Book Depository building immediately after the Lee Harvey Oswald is exactly what he says he is. What does he say? I'm a patsy. I didn't shoot anyone. And indeed, Alex, he has no nitrate burns or no powder burns on his chest or his arms. Impossible if he had fired a leaky 2 vintage Carcano Italian Army carbine that day. That's because he didn't shoot anybody that day. But Johnson's certainly not acting alone. The Central Intelligence Agency, deeply distrustful of Kennedy in the wake of the Bay of Pigs invasion, deeply distrustful of him in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which we now know that the false narrative that brave Jack and Bobby Kennedy faced down Khrushchev, who removed the missiles from Cuba, that's simply not true. They made a secret deal to remove NATO missiles from Turkey and Italy in return for a pledge from Khrushchev to remove the missiles from Cuba, which to this day we don't believe actually happened. And then there's the mob. The mob's involvement is based on a deal made between Ambassador Joseph Kennedy and the mob leaders, including Sam Giancana, who basically convenes a meeting of all the mob chieftains in Chicago. And the deal goes like this. John Kennedy's Justice Department will lay off Carlos Marcello, who ran the mob in Texas and Louisiana, and Santo Trafficante, who runs the mob at that point in Florida. Eisenhower's DOJ had been attempting to deport both of them, but they were supposed to drop those deportations. Jack Kennedy gets elected. Bobby Kennedy becomes Attorney General. He not only doesn't drop them, he intensifies the effort to deport both of them, thus double-crossing the mob. Now, I believe between the fingerprints that we found in the Texas School Book Depository and the bombshell tape that was produced here on Johnson's role has now been absolutely established. If you listen to the jailhouse bugged recordings of Sam Giancana, both before and after Kennedy's, I think the mob's involvement pretty much proven. What I'm looking for today is the final piece that proves the CIA's involvement.
And we have documents that have come out that Oswald was working with the FBI and CIA. We also have George Herbert Walker Bush, who became CIA director later under Nixon, with supposedly never being in it. Obviously Skull and Bones, where they get a lot of their head people. But he was photographed in Dallas. And later came out in documents that a George Herbert Walker Bush was in Dallas.
Absolutely correct. There's a couple pieces of this. First of all, does anyone who is our age not recall that where they were when they heard that John Kennedy had been shot? Because for 30 years, George H.W. Bush insisted he couldn't remember where he was. Well, we know where he was. He was in Dallas the night before. He was in Dallas the night after. The morning of the 22nd, he went to Tyler, Texas, to make a speech. He was beginning his run for the U.S. Senate in Texas in 1964. Within 1 hour of Kennedy's murder, George Herbert Walker Bush calls the station chief of the FBI in Houston and says, I'm in Tyler, Texas. I've just heard the president's been shot. I wanted you to know about a Harris County, Texas, a young Republican who I've heard may have been making threats against the president. By the way, did I mention that I'm in Tyler, Texas? He's establishing an alibi. I think that is abundantly clear. Interestingly, Alex, 4 presidents are in the ground in Dallas that day. John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, former Vice President Richard Nixon, who just happens to be in town to give a speech to a Pepsi Cola bottling convention, and of course, future President George Herbert Walker Bush. How coincidental. Of the Watergate burglars, there were 8 of them, but 4 of them were on the ground in Dallas, in Dealey Plaza that day. Could it be because...
And E. Howard Hunt on his deathbed, we were one of the first to air the tape and had a son on, said that, well, he didn't shoot him, but he was a backbencher, basically quarterbacking.
Absolutely correct. So, look, I think all the pieces are falling in place today. I'm looking for the final piece. This is the CIA piece. And their motive is, as I say, clear. The CIA has basically double-crossed Kennedy. The great complaint of conservatives for many decades was that Kennedy did not provide air cover for the men storming the beaches in Cuba. In fact, the Bay of Pigs plan included 29 fighter jets that were supposed to be flown out of Panama, captained by Cuban pilots. And the CIA, Charles Cable, the brother of Dallas Mayor Earl Cable, canceled the air cover the day before the invasion, guaranteeing that it would be a disaster unless John Kennedy ordered the U.S. Air Force in, just blowing the cover of deniability. Remember, the Bay of Pigs was supposed to look like a Cuban uprising rather than
and
U.S.
they were trying to suck Kennedy into a full invasion. That's all come out. But let's go back to the bombshell. You've talked to Trump. Pompeo, after you broke it years ago, it was confirmed Pompeo got Trump not to. He's talked about that publicly. But Trump told you that this is going to be shocking. I mean, flesh that out specifically.
Yeah, it's very hard for us to know. Obviously, that's why we're waiting here with bated breath. But I think it completes the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement. One of the real, I wouldn't say problems, but one of the factors in the JFK research community is it depends on your prism. So the House Committee, Select Committee on which in the 70s re-examined the of John Kennedy, they only look at organized crime. The CIA, by the way, refuses to testify or provide any documents for that congressional investigation. They basically stonewall it. The staffers hired are all experts on organized crime. Therefore, they reach the correct conclusion. Organized crime was involved in the murder of Kennedy. They don't tell us who, and they don't tell us how.
And let's expand on that. The CIA's always used organized crime.
Well, particularly in this case, because once Castro takes over in Cuba, all of the U.S. intelligence assets are expelled, but the mob-owned casinos are still there. Therefore, there are still mobsters on the ground. It's the only way the U.S. can get intelligence on what Castro is doing, what his movements are. As you know, they tried multiple times to him, and they failed, including the famous exploding cigar, which didn't work.
All right, so, I want to speak to this, though. Because, I mean, you've talked about before, but specifically, and Trump said it to others, what has Trump said specifically? Because he said, the White House said today, people are going to be shocked. That's a repeat of what you said. He said years ago. Bring us back to that. Specifically, what did Trump say to you?
He said, I said, well, why aren't you releasing this? And he said, well, Pompeo thinks it would expose our methods and sources. And I said, but Mr. President, you've seen it all. What it is. What is it? And he said, it's so horrible, he said, I can't tell you.